Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bristol Break-up Club. We're a small welcoming club set up by Stowe and I together to provide group support for people navigating their way through a breakup or divorce in a safe and friendly environment. So I'd like to thank you first of all for joining us today. So who am I? I'm Claire Black. I'm a breakup and divorce coach. I support my clients through the emotional ups and downs of breakup with confidence, dignity and strength. I'm a qualified coach and I'm also a single divorced mum to 2 teenage boys. Stowe Family Law are the biggest specialist family law firm in the UK, and they have offices all over the country. They work very hard to provide the best service possible for every client and collaborate with other professionals like myself and Alison and Stephanie to give a bespoke service that fits the needs of each client. And today Stowe are represented by Jennifer Hargreaves and Katie Jordan. Stephanie Beddes is the owner of Kilsaran Financial Planning. She's waving at you. She has over 20 years experience in financial services and works with clients through divorce to help them make the right financial decisions for their future, including about pensions, investments, mortgages and family protection. And tonight we have a special guest, Alison Porter, who is the founder and owner of Pennywise Consultants. And I think I will leave her to explain exactly what she does herself. So welcome, Alison. Thank you very much for being here. You're on mute.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you. And thank you, Stowe Family Law, for including me in this. Now, most of you, I'm going to explain what I do, and most of you will think, oh, I've never heard of that before. Well, there's a reason for that. We are currently the only firm that do what we do in the way we do it. So I'm going to do my best to explain what we do at Pennywise Consultants. Now, I think probably everyone, well, first of all, I'm going to give a disclaimer. I'd just like to make it clear from the outset that I'm not a financial advisor. We're not FCA regulated. We're financial lifestyle analysts, and we work out the cost of living for people. The annual cost of living, we then give that figure to the financial advisors like Steph, and she will put that into a cash flow model and come out with the figure that you need to live on annually. So we don't conflict with anyone. We like to think that we help. So what is a financial lifestyle analyst? Well, it is literally, as I said, someone who works out the cost of living. So we look at what people spend on their house, children, pets, car, holidays, all that stuff. The most common thing when faced with section 3 of the Form E. Now, section 3 of the Form E, I don't know how many people watching tonight have got that horrible document sitting on their pile of things that I'd rather do another day, but it's about 38 pages and it involves full financial disclosure. Now, most people can write down, you know, that they've got a pension statement, they can write down the value of their pension, they can get valuations done of jewelry, property, all that kind of thing. But there's a really big question tucked away in section 3, and that is fundamentally, what do you need to live on for the rest of your life? Well, that is a very big question, and it's one that most people struggle with. In fact, we've had plenty of Form Es put in front of us where section 3 has been left completely blank. So what we do is we have a very, very extensive checklist, a checklist that we will ask the client to sort of tick boxes and things, nothing too onerous. And then we work out for them exactly what I've said. What do you spend on your clothes, your children's clothes, your pets, holidays? We break it all down into the categories that lawyers want. And we can do that in one of 3 ways, really. So if we're presented with a budget that is overinflated, or in the client's view, overinflated, Then we will ask you to provide us with your bank statements and credit cards for a 12-year period. That's very normal. That's what has to be disclosed in the Form E. And we go through it transaction by transaction, and we allocate each entry to a column. And at the end of that, we will know what is spent historically in a 12-month period. Now, remind me about COVID at the end, because that has created a bit of a sort of spanner in the wheel, because spending didn't necessarily go down a lot during COVID, but people spent things on different things. So, for example, my holiday was cancelled. I bought an electric bike. You know, that's the kind of thing that happened. So lawyers are actually agreeing, well, Jennifer and Katie will corroborate this, but we've come across lawyers that are agreeing to look at a different 12-month period, or to, you know, longer, or just, you know, a more realistic year. So we do that analysis, and then we can look at the budget and say, well, what do you mean you spend £2,000 a year on clothes? Actually, last year you only spent 500, or your spouse only, or other half only spent 500. So that's how we challenge a budget, by looking at the actual spending from a previous 12-month period. Creating a budget from scratch is very difficult. There are people who have been controlled, economically abused, and there are people who've never been allowed access or haven't wanted access to bank statements, credit cards. And the other side may not be in a hurry to let you have a look at all of those. So that's where we really come in, I think, because we can sit down with you and say, well, where do you normally eat? Where do you normally buy your clothes? Where do you normally go on holiday? How often do you go on holiday? We ask all these questions. It might take about 2 hours on the telephone, but other than that, you don't need to do anything. And we have data which has all been carefully researched. Anything that isn't in our data, we research for you. And then we put any information you've given us in as well. And the more information you give us, the better it is, because there are two reasons for that. One, you will be really familiar with the budget. So if you're cross-examined on it, then you will know where all the numbers came from. There's nothing worse, I think, from a lawyer's perspective, than sitting in front of a judge and the judge says, well, where did you get that figure from? And the client says, well, my lawyer told me to put it in there. That's what we've been hearing is not really what they want to hear. So I think it's very important we work very closely with the client. We like to know exactly what's going in and why, and where the figures have come from. All that is, our reports are evidence-based. They're annotated, so you know where the figures have come from. But it's our intention to create a catch-all. We call them budgets. The lawyers call them income need schedules. But it's so important to get everything in there, because I'll talk about some of our top tips in a minute, but it's extraordinary how things can get missed. There was a post on LinkedIn last week, I think, which someone put up saying that if you go into London or somewhere to work and you go to somewhere like Pret-a-Manger or Starbucks every day for lunch, you might spend £14 on your lunch every day. Now that you've got to remember to put that in your budget, because if you multiply that by 5 days a week, or even 3 these days, 48 weeks of the year, that is a significant sum. So what we advise people to do is if they want to do it themselves, look at their bank statements and credit cards, annotate them, because you might buy something in M&S and then look at it 4 months later and think, what on earth did I buy? Was that school uniform for the children? Or was that underwear for me? Or was that, pair of trousers or something? So if you can, while you're going along, at least when your bank statement or credit card comes through, annotate it, because then you'll find it much easier, or we'll find it much easier if we do it for you, to tot up everything and have it in the right column. And And it is important to think about the little things. We have this thing where we say no item is too small. The parking adds up, the payments of the congestion charge. As I say, you know, food, coffees, everything else. It sounds really, really boring to have to do it, but it's really worthwhile if you can do it. I'm just going to have to put my glasses on to read some of the other points we've got. But it's
while you
very
put your glasses on, Alison, sorry to interrupt you. I forgot to say at the beginning. Alison's happy to take questions as we go through. So if anybody does have any questions, pop them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll keep an eye on them. I'll bring them into the conversation if that works.
No, I'd love some questions, and this is your opportunity to. I mean, you're welcome to ring us anytime, and we'll also talk you through what you're doing. And after this, I was going to say that if you want copies of any of our PDFs of top tips and things, I'm very happy to send them to you. But very happy to answer questions. So yes, one of the top tips is start annotating your bank statements and credit cards, so you remember who was who and who it was for. Try and gain access as early as possible to 12 months of bank statements and credit cards. If you haven't got them, try and get them off your other half. If that's not possible, it doesn't matter, because we can fill in those gaps. Don't forget cash withdrawals. Cash is a real bane in, I think, all our jobs. If you take out £100 a week, we just need to know what you're spending that on, because lawyers don't like, and judges certainly don't like, big cash columns with just cash, cash, cash. So do you spend that on your cleaner? Do you spend it on your gardener? Do you spend it on your manicurist? You know, whatever it is, just keep a notebook, actually, or a page of notes in your there are other phones than iPhones. Just keep a note somewhere when you're handing over cash where it's going. You'll find that information really useful. In fact, it's quite a good idea, if you don't know what you spend on a day-to-day basis, to just start keeping a note. Try it for a month. Just write down, I went to the sandwich shop, I bought a sandwich. I went in a taxi, paid the taxi in cash. I went, you know, I mean, cash actually now is going out, but we're still finding it's an issue. Make a list of the utility companies you use. Is it EDF Energy? Is it British Gas? Is it whatever? Because if we know which company we use and you don't know the figures, we can do the research and work out the numbers for you. So keep a list of your utilities. We will ask you things, or if you're doing it yourself, then you will need to put down things like Netflix, Spotify, all those little things that add up. You know, £7 here, £6 there. What's my Sky subscription? If you don't know, that's fine. But just make a note of everything for a month, I would say is a really good idea. If you have joint bank accounts and credit cards with your spouse or partner, start annotating their expenditure. You know, they may have paid for new trainers for your child or something. Write it down, just make a note. So the other thing, which is really quite important, is, despite sort of popular belief in the newspapers and things, it's very common for people to underestimate their budgets. Going through a divorce, people feel depressed, don't necessarily look after themselves as well, all that kind of thing. So have a think about that, and don't necessarily stop spending that money. I mean, I'm not saying go out and spend more, because you'll get caught out on that. But what I am saying is, try and continue the same pattern of spending. So go and get your hair done, go to the manicurist, go to the pedicurist, go to the massage, but whatever you want to do. It's a good idea anyway. I think Claire would agree to look after yourself. But some people get caught by the fact that they start spending less post-separation, and then those are the bank statements and credit cards looked at, and then that can affect your budget going forward. So, I mean, we do take care of that as well. We may say, okay, you haven't had your hair cut for a year, but when you did, where did you go? How much do you spend and everything? So we can recover that if we're doing the budget. But it's just a good idea to try and keep your spending the same.
Alison, quick question on that, actually, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Do you ever have a case where, for example, there's been some sort of economic control and one party has control of the purse strings and the other party doesn't? And actually the party who doesn't have the control of the purse strings finds that they have a lot less money to spend because they're not being provided with the sum of money that they perhaps used to be provided with. How do you cater for that when you're looking at current and future budgets?
Well, that's very interesting. And funnily enough, we've just, one of our clients who was very badly economically abused has just agreed to be interviewed. And when it's published, we'll put it on our website. But it's a really serious problem and it's more common than you think. So what we do in those cases, and in fact, I did it for this particular client, is we sit them down face to face on Zoom, over the phone, and we go through our whole checklist with them. And if they say, I've never been allowed to buy face cream, I had to sneak a pot of face cream into my Waitrose shop, then we'll say, okay, so in your previous experience, what did you buy and where did you buy it? And we will do all that research for them. And in fact, those are the hardest budgets we do because there's a real resistance and fear of looking A, greedy, but B, just what on earth is my other half going to think when I say this? So we gently coach the client through it. Coach is perhaps the wrong word, but hold their hand through it and say, right, when you used to go on holiday or when you now go on holiday with your children, where would you like to go? And we'll cost it all out for them. So it's perfectly possible to do. And we've done it on a number of occasions and it has always had a successful result. And we've loved watching our clients actually grow in confidence as they start looking at the budget and knowing how much everything costs, and they know what they're going to need going forwards. They know their lawyer's going to most probably achieve that for them. And we honestly watch the fear and distress drop away. I was asked once what the most rewarding part of my job is, and I said to that lawyer, it's helping somebody who's been economically abused to regain their autonomy, confidence, strength, everything, and say, right, I can go on with my life now, confident and with enough money to do it. But there's no problem with that. We just say, clothes, okay, you haven't been allowed to buy any, but if you were, or in the past, where did you go? Did you go to Boden? Did you go to Dior? Did you go to M&S? Where did you go? And then we'll put in an estimated cost for each thing that's reasonable, that fits the amount of money in the pot. So yes, that's a really good question. And we don't enjoy doing those jobs. We find them quite distressing, but we find them very rewarding.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
So, well, I've gone through our top tips. I think, well, what I'd like to say a bit more about when we do our budgets. What people often forget is that nothing lasts forever. A washing machine isn't going to last forever. A car isn't going to last forever. Toaster isn't going to last forever. So within our budgets, from our data, we drop in replacement items. So white goods, electrical goods, laptops for the children, laptops for you, iPads, no longer iPods. Apparently Apple are getting rid of those, which is really distressing me. But we will then say, right, okay, so for example, you've got a washing machine that's likely to last for 5 years, costs £500. Let's make the maths easy because I'm rubbish at maths. So you've got a washing machine that's £500, it's going to last for 5 years. We put into the budget £100 a year for that washing machine. So we're allowing for replacement of things, and we adjust the frequency of expenditure. So you might redecorate the interior of your house every 7 years. So we put in a figure for that. Clearing the gutters might be every year or every other year, emptying the septic tank, whatever. We make sure everything's in there and there's a frequency of replacement. But all the figures then boil down into an annual figure. And our experience is that the judiciary love these because they're given 2 sheets of paper that have every single item on it. It's all reasoned, it's realistic, it's fair, and they really don't like a budget that has not enough on it because they know that's not going to be fair. They don't like the overinflated budgets. They just want their lives made easier, so. But what I hope doing these budgets is that actually it will avoid getting to litigation stage. And we know this works well in mediation. Because we're an independent, impartial party, we're usually working for one side or the other, but we can work for both. We can be we can take a joint instruction. So what we hope is that when one person's saying, well, I want to live in this house and I need this much, and I want to live in this house and I need this much, and everyone's arguing over what it's going to cost, that we can come in and say, right, it's going to cost you that much to run that house, having worked out all the committed spending, which is committed spending is lawyers speak for the boring spending, all the utilities, all that kind of thing. And then the personal spending. And we have come across case after case where perhaps one person has said, I want to stay in the family home. I'm not moving. I'm absolutely not moving out of this family home. And then we've shown them how much it's going to cost them to run it. And that means they're going to have no holidays, no personal life, no eating out, no nothing. Then they might think, or you might think, well, actually, I could live in a slightly smaller house that costs less money to run. And then I've got more money to play. So what we hope is that by helping people to come to an agreement earlier over the finances, because there are really 2 things that I think make life very contentious, and that's children and the finances. So if we can help with the finances, who needs what to run their life, then I think, and I know that that often takes a lot of the heat out of the argument, because it's not one lawyer saying to the other one, my client needs this. It's us saying they need that amount to run their life. And there isn't always enough money in the pot to have what you want. You won't necessarily be able to have the same holidays that you had when you were a family, because it costs a lot more money to run 2 houses than it does one. And as one lawyer said to me, you have to be very, very, very well off before both parties can walk away and live the same lifestyle they had before. So everybody's got to compromise somewhere. Everybody, just about, except for very high net worth or whatever. But most people have to be realistic and say, well, we probably do need to live in a smaller house, because if we both want to see the children at weekends, we might both need a 3-bedroom house. And that's going to cost a lot more to run than one 5-bedroom house or 6-bedroom house or whatever. So we do try and bring reality and reason into it, which is why the lawyers like using us. And ultimately, we just want to be able to help people walk away from their divorce or separation with enough money to live on, because if you have a clean break and you settle for more or less, more money or less money than is right for you, then you are quite literally going to pay for that for the rest of your life. I mean, I had friends to stay last night, and he's being absolutely crippled by his maintenance payments to his ex-wife, and she got a far, far bigger slice of the cake than she should have done, really. And he's now struggling to keep up, and he's 57. His earning capacity going forwards is not what it was. So it's so important to try and ask for the right amount, both halves of the couple. And we like to think that we help you as the lawyers too, you know, Jennifer and Katie, because I don't imagine you went to law school to start working out the price of washing machines and curtains and pillows and garden mowers and all that kind of thing. So we like to try and take that off your plate. We like to think we're quicker at it, you know, dare I say it, better at it. And it will probably work out cheaper, but I think it helps lawyers to put forward a really reasoned case. And I think ultimately that's what most lawyers want for their clients, is to achieve the best outcome for them. We also think that if we do it or help somebody do it, we're quite happy to spot check budgets that have been done by the client, just to make sure that they're complete. Then, you know, we'd like to think that this will achieve the outcome you want, take the stress away, get it off that too difficult pile, and give you a figure that then you can give to someone like Stephanie's financial advisor. I mean, you don't always have to use a financial advisor, but it is a good idea, because they can take our figure, what do you spend or what do you need a year, put it in their cash flow model, and work out for the lawyers the income that you need and the capital that you need to ask for in your settlement. So we work very closely with financial advisors. We don't compete against them. We complement what they do. We like to think we complement what lawyers do and complement what Claire's doing as a divorce coach, because apart from the emotionally abused, the other category that is really hard to deal with are people who are depressed, who just are under such duress from the whole separation, divorce process and everything, that they actually can't think straight. And it's just a mountain too high to climb. So hopefully we help with the sort of the mental health side of things as well. We have very busy businessmen coming to us that just say, do you know what? I haven't got time for this. You know, I want to see the kids at the weekend. I don't want to sit there doing this. Can you do it for me? So we get asked to do jobs because people are too busy, depressed, economically abused, just have no knowledge of the finances, or they simply just want an expert to do their budget for them. It's a very, very important part of the divorce process.
Alison, do you when you're working with a client, I presume this is the case, but I just want to check, do you take into account things like how often the children are with them and how much that will cost, and what the kind of agreed perhaps shared care of children is, and what the factual situation is as to whether who the children live with and things like that, if there's children in the situation?
No, we do. So if they're at day school and they're eating at home every day, then the food bill will look different to if they're at boarding school and they're only home for the holidays. We do that with university holidays as well. So yes, we take the amount they're with each parent into account. We take well, yes, I mean, we take the amount there with each parent into account, and particularly if they're at boarding school, then that gets accounted for across the board. We sort of see number of weeks they're at school, number of weeks they're at home, because that makes a big difference to food bills. Perhaps not so much difference to utility bills, because you've got to heat a house anyway, but it does make a difference. And then holidays, equally, if you say, well, we spent this on a holiday last year, but that involved you and your spouse and the children, then we would say, well, that's one fewer plane flight ticket. It's maybe a single supplement in a hotel. It sort of swings both ways. So yes, in answer to your question, we look at it that closely. Yes.
Okay. What happens if there's, there isn't resolution yet about where the children, if there are children, where they're going to live, and how you can make, if you can't, if there isn't agreement, and that's a very difficult thing to put your finger on exactly who they're going to be with for what amount of time, or there's a court case ongoing perhaps for access to children. How do you cater for that kind of thing?
Well, we can do the budget based on what is reality at that time. And then we've had several clients come back to us a year or two later, but they're still waiting for court proceedings and things to be settled. And they've then asked us to revise it. So we can do that. So we can have a look at it again.
It can be a moving feast.
It can be moving feast, but remember that these are sort of, it's not an exact science. It is when we're analysing statements and we're challenging a budget, then it's more of an exact science. But when we're doing these budgets, there has to be a little bit of room for manoeuvre. But if they want us to look at it again, because the circumstances have changed, we can. Equally, if you don't know where you're going to be living, which is very common, you might still all be in the family home, but you have no idea where you're both going to end up. Then you can give us property particulars from Rightmove or somewhere of the sort of property you think you're going to live in, and we'll do the costings based on that. But again, that might not be the 3-bedroom house you buy. You might buy one 3 streets away or something. But I think the point is that we've produced a figure that is within the realms of what's going to be needed, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. There's a couple of questions in the chat. I think one of them might be possibly more of a legal question, I think. So I don't know if Katie or Jennifer can leap in perhaps. So the question is about earning capacity and where earning capacity fits in terms of agreeing a financial resolution. There's a little bit of story in terms of it's a friend who's if one party says they won't search for a better paid job because they've got a child to take care of and so on, how does that fit into agreeing a financial resolution? I don't know if that might be more of a legal question for Katie or Jennifer, I think.
Okay, Jennifer, I'm happy to jump in and take this if you're happy. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect, Katie, thank you.
Yeah, so I agree, Claire. I think it is probably more of a legal question. In terms of earning capacity, basically there is something called the Section 25 factors of the Matrimonial Causes Act, which is the number of factors that allow the court to consider whether they are going to depart from the equality of 50-50. One of those factors is the future earnings of the party and the capacity for the future earnings. So it's certainly something that the court and we as solicitors take into consideration when we're negotiating, or in the situation where you are going through financial remedy. It's on a case-by-case basis, and the reality is there's no fixed formula. It will depend on your individual situation, the family situation, and how much weight a court would place upon that. But it is certainly a factor that the court can consider at looking at that financial settlement. So it would be looking into that in much more detail as to how that would affect your family, your individual settlement, and how much weight we think the court would place upon that argument. So it's certainly something to be considered. It is a factor that the court can consider, but it would be looking into it in much more detail because there unfortunately is no fixed formula. So hopefully that helps. Sorry, Claire, I think you're on mute as well.
Thank you. You'd think I'd have learned how to do this by now, wouldn't you, after a couple of years? What I was saying was that, of course, if anybody has any, particular facts that they'd like to be checked out, you can always contact Katie or Jennifer after the session to get specific advice on your specific situation.
Absolutely, we're more than happy to assist.
Okay, sorry, Alison.
No, it's fine. And actually, I'd quite like to ask Stephanie a question. Having talked about what we do, I wonder if you could then, in your own words, I've sort of said, explain how knowing what people spend in a year, which let's face it, most of us don't. I wonder if you could just explain how that then translates into what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. So just what Alison offers is a fantastic service, because even when I speak to clients and I talk about, never mind going through divorce, what do you need in retirement, what's that figure, people just never know. So it's, it's a really important thing to know your figures, and especially when you're going to go through divorce, because the decision that you make now or the settlement is going to affect you for the rest of your life. So what Alison does plays into what I do. So it's really good that we then have a figure, right? So this is the annual income, or this is if we need a capital figure, this is the amount that we need to work towards. We can plug all that into a cash flow modeling system that will give us very much a realistic and sensible cash flow to see, does that figure work for you? We're not talking about for the next 10, 15 years. We're talking about right up until death, effectively. So we will plan all that in. It's really good for clients because it's going to do one of two things. It's going to either give you the satisfaction that, yes, what is going to be proposed in a financial settlement is going to be suitable and it's going to give me what I need, or it's going to go the other way and it's going to go, actually, I'm not going to be able to sustain the lifestyle that I've had. So that's obviously then a discussion point to go back to your lawyer and have that discussion. So we all work in conjunction with each other. Again, if it deemed right, the lawyer could then ask for higher settlement, or if it's in a position then where actually, what's on the table is what you are going to be getting, we can then do some analysis to say, okay, so some of the things that maybe you have been accustomed to in your lifestyle, we need to maybe strip some of those out and then replay what those figures are in that cash flow modeling. So it gives us then a really good idea of, what are the essential things that we need to include in that, what are the discretionary things and the nice to have. And we can really work with the figures then to give you peace of mind that actually, if we tweak it and we do X, Y, Z, it's not the end of the world, and I've had clients where, they have had to consider going back to working full time. It really gives insight into what the landscape ahead looks like and enables clients then to make decisions for them and their families going forward.
I think, and that dovetails really nicely sometimes into the sort of work that I do with people around how important it is to have that clarity. Yeah. And even though you may not necessarily like the answers that come back, if you have that clarity, that can help cut into the sort of overwhelm, and you can start to actually then make a plan and work out what you're going to do. And that's much better than living in a kind of fog of not knowing. That's actually much more frightening in most cases, that not knowing.
Yeah.
We have another question that's popped up, Alison. So do you look at past history of spending where there's been overspending and wasting money?
Yes, funny enough, that's a hot topic for us.
I can imagine.
Funnily enough, it's a hot topic because it was an old friend of mine who contacted me last week and said that he's getting divorced because his wife just cannot stop spending. I mean, her spending is absolutely ridiculous, to the point where, I mean, he's now lost his very well paid job, but she's carrying on spending as if he still had it. So that's going to fall, I would have thought, fairly shortly into our challenging budget strategy. But of course, she has the history of having spent that amount, so it's slightly different. And what we've done in cases like this before is we can highlight. So for example, if it's holidays, which I can think of one case we did where the husband earned 10,000 a month and the wife was asking for 11. So this was not going to stack up. So she, her spending was ridiculous. She spent £4,000 in 1 year on scented candles. Well, I happen to know that a Joe Malone big candle is £350, but you know, even so, that's going some, isn't it? £4,000 a year on scented candles. So we were asked to really highlight certain sections, the holidays, the spending, like that kind of thing, because then the lawyers on the other side were able to say, this is ridiculous and it's not sustainable. And what happened was, she was determined to go to a final hearing. She thought that if she got in front of a judge, she would get everything she wanted. But what happened was that the FDR, enough doubt was cast on her argument that actually she settled. So I think sometimes it can be just highlighting what the spending is, so that that person can see in black and white how ridiculous the spending's been, and then they're shown what's available, and the disparity between the two is, you know, too ridiculous to argue. So we do come across that, and we've got a case on at the moment where that's happening, which I think I mentioned to you before we started, where section 3 of the Form E was empty except for a request for holidays for £750,000. And you know, that just wasn't going to happen. There was no argument behind it, no nothing. So if we can talk to the client and say, where did you go on holiday historically? Are you going to be taking the children as well? So we can, I think what I'm trying to say is, we can work for the client on the other side and build an income need schedule for them that says, well, I need that amount too, or not the same amount, but it's all, I think I'd like one of you two lawyers to answer this, but it's a balancing scales. You know, there's a certain amount in the pot, and one person can't have 90% and the other person 10%. That's just not going to get a financial order signed or anything. So if we can work for, say for the sake of argument, we're talking about a husband and wife, and it's the wife who's spending and the husband who's trying to challenge it, then we can do a budget for him showing all his requirements, which sort of reduces the amount left anyway on the other side. So it is a balancing act, but we can highlight ridiculous or unnecessary spending, and then it's up to the lawyers, I'm afraid, to hand it over, and it's up to the lawyers to argue that it's unreasonable given the circumstances and the amount in the pot available. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think so. If it doesn't, if it doesn't, please ask again, or let us know that if there's something else that you needed to know from that. Or
question. If you want to talk about your particular scenario speculatively, then our contact details can be downloaded from our About Us page, and you're very welcome to give either me or our project manager Suzanne a call, and we can discuss it.
Yeah, I think Stowe will send out an email to everybody who's booked onto the call with everybody's contact details anyway, so you will get those.
Yeah, that's fine, but we're very happy to follow up on this and answer any questions, because if you're anything like me, you'll start thinking of questions that you'd like to have asked afterwards.
Okay. So this person's already requested a call.
Oh, okay. Good.
There you go. Perfect. Okay. Is there any more questions? Keep popping them in the chat so that we can ask Alison while we've got her here. Alison, I have lots of clients who are really scared about filling in the Form E, and I know you've given us some tips already about, you know, looking at your bank statements already now and annotating them, not forgetting to think about cash and all of those things that you talked about earlier. Do you have any practical tips in terms of actually how to break down that 38-page questionnaire into sort of more manageable chunks? Because that's one of the things I talk about with them, is how could you divide this into manageable chunks so that you're just doing a bit of it at a time?
Well, we don't deal with any of the Form E except for section 3, except for the sort of income needs schedules. But I think, how would I do it? I mean, I'm not usually a procrastinator, but I'm procrastinating about renewing my will at the moment. You know, there are some things that we just don't want to do. I think if it was me, I would probably sit down with the first 3 months of statements, just a bite-sized bit, and annotate those, just so you feel you're doing something. I mean, if you're familiar with Excel, start, you know, bunging it into columns in Excel. Your lawyer will always give you, I think I'm right in saying, Jennifer and Katie, that you have your checklist that you would ask people to fill out. So you can ask your lawyer for a checklist. And I think the biggest tip that I've heard is to start keeping a notebook or a file in your phone. So as you go along, you say, oh, I just spent, you know, £12 in the bakery. I just spent £30 in boots. You know, you write it down. If you have the statements, I would annotate them. If you don't have the statements, I think I'd keep a notebook and just start making a note each day for a month. And actually, I think that would just make it easier. If you try and do the whole thing in one go.
That's the thing. It's a very daunting looking document. When you first look at it.
You can ask a friend to help you. I mean, what I wouldn't recommend, which the wife of the friend I just mentioned did, was sort of go out with a couple of bottles of wine with your best friend and your new boyfriend and do your schedule of outgoings, because what you're going to come out with is something like this that's then going to get dismantled. But what I would advise is sitting down with a good friend or a member of your family and get them to help you. Yeah.
Somebody who perhaps is less emotionally involved is probably a helpful person to perhaps sit with to help you work through each little stage of it. And the other thing I always say to people is, you know, break it down into chunks of time. So, you know, half an hour every day, or an hour every day, or even 20 minutes every day, and gradually work your way through. Yeah.
And when I started, sorry, go on.
I was just going to add a point there. There are some really helpful guidance tools as well on, you know, the government website, which do break it down, which is very helpful. But also, obviously, if you do have solicitors, they tend to break it down, go through it with you and provide that guidance. But there are, you know, documents out there that do provide that guidance. And I completely agree with Alison and Claire that breaking it down, I always say to clients, almost go to the back. There is the checklist, and sort of start with that checklist, because then you can break it down into sections, because it does seem so daunting and overwhelming to start with. And also just remember that some of it may not relate to you or apply. So you might look at this horrendous document and actually, you know, not all of it needs to be completed. So I always say to my clients, go to the back page where it's telling you what evidence you need and go through it step by step so it doesn't feel so daunting.
Brilliant.
So hopefully that helps as well. That's
a really, really good idea. And lawyers will always sit down and do it with you, but you know, it's up to you. There will be somebody out there who can help.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Are there any? Let me see if there's any more questions popped up in here. So there was a question earlier on about children. So and I'm not quite sure exactly when this question popped up, but are you working on the assumption that the children are with you? So this is somebody who had to leave their spouse with the children in the family home, and has now spent a lot of money to go to the family court to get access to the children. And there's evidence of there was control in the relationship. Okay, and this person continued to pay the wages to the children for a period of time, as was told, I'm assuming, by the spouse, but I don't know, was told that the children would suffer if I didn't. So in that kind of case, Alison, how would you approach that? Because that sounds as though there's very much an outcome that isn't decided yet, and there's a lot of uncertainty. How would you approach that? And maybe that's a legal question actually as well.
Well, I have to admit, I'm not really sure. I'd feel more comfortable, I think, with Jennifer or Katie answering that, because we tend to come in when generally the lawyers give us a specific remit. We're usually approached by them first. So I think that is a legal question. Okay.
Is one of you happy to perhaps tell? I mean, obviously there are very specific circumstances here, so you might just be able to just give us a general guidance, and then perhaps this person could contact you guys for a bit more specific advice again.
Absolutely. I think my understanding of the question, but again, I think it's quite a specific situation. In terms of children, obviously the future needs for children do need to be considered in any financial settlement. So that comes under sort of two elements really. Obviously future needs in terms of property, where the children are going to reside and how that affects the housing needs, but also in terms of child maintenance and what that means. Ultimately, in terms as well of child maintenance, it's based on the child maintenance agency, so they will carry out an assessment based on the salary, and that is really the law, and that's the sort of point where it ends. You can have a financial consent order that deals with child maintenance, but it's only valid for 12 months. After that 12 months, it would be based on the calculation that's been assessed by the child maintenance agency. So I think there's two elements there really. It's looking at, you know, children's needs do impact some financial settlements, especially if they're much younger, because you need to consider that you know, if the children are with one parent more than the other, you're going to need a bigger house, more bedrooms. There's lots of factors to be considered. So I think it is very specific. Again, as we do say, it's on a case-by-case basis, and there's sort of no fixed formula, but I would be looking at it because, you know, the child maintenance agency is also based on how often the children are with you. So if you've got, you know, an equal share in terms of the custody of the children, it may be that you need to look at that to see whether actually you're paying more than you should be. So I think what I would advise is absolutely come and speak to one of us. We will obviously be able to look at it in much more detail, but I think, you know, the important point is children do have an effect on a financial settlement, but again, it's really going to depend on the individual circumstances.
Thank you. Another question has popped in. Is there a time limit from when you've got divorce? So the divorce part has gone through, but you didn't complete a financial resolution and you need to do one now. So is there a time limit on reaching financial agreement after your divorce is finalised in terms of the divorce paperwork? Jennifer, is that?
Yeah, I think that's a legal question.
I think it is, yeah. I thought Jennifer was speaking then, but you're still on mute. Or Katie.
Oh, I'm not sure if Jennifer's having some technical problems.
I think she might be.
I honestly, sorry, Jennifer, I don't mean to keep answering this question, but I think she is having some technical problems. So I'm going to jump in just in case. No, there isn't. So in terms of that, the reality is no, there isn't a limit. And that's the risk that if you do not deal with your financial settlement as soon as possible, the risk is that you get legally divorced, which is just you getting divorced. And then you go on with your life. And 5 years later, perhaps when your financial position has changed, that your ex-partner, ex-husband or wife comes knocking at the door and says, actually, I now want to deal with the financial settlement and I want half of what you've got. So, you know, there isn't a limit. We would encourage, of course, though, that you do try and deal with the finances, because there is the risk that one, without doing that, your financial position may change, and then you know, either side can still make a claim at a later date. And also, if you don't have a financial consent order, it doesn't sever the financial ties between you. So without without that clean break, without severing those financial ties. As I said, I had a case actually where a lady had gone on 5 years to successfully run a business, you know, sweat, blood and tears. She'd worked very hard. They hadn't dealt with a financial settlement. They'd only dealt with the actual divorce. And then 5 years later, the husband wanted to deal with the finances and was trying to make a claim to a business that she'd worked very hard to build. So I hope that answers. There is no limit, but what we would say is certainly encourage people to try and resolve matters, because as I said, the risk is that whilst you haven't got that financial settlement, you're still tied financially. Your financial position is going to change, and you want to protect yourself. I mean, there of course are situations where parties aren't able to deal with it immediately. There's children, you know, there's a number of factors that we must consider, and there may be a good reason as to why delaying it is in your benefit. But of course, we would try and encourage people to deal with it as soon as possible, just in case, obviously, the position changes. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Des, I think. Another question. So I'm on a working wage and my ex-wife is on benefits, which add up to more than my wages. Child custody is 50-50, but she claims all the child tax credits. Is that correct? I think that's a legal question.
Sorry, can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
Yeah, my understanding, and Katie will correct me if I'm wrong on the benefits point of view, but I think they can only be paid to one party anyway. So it's a case of coming to an agreement between the parties of how that's going to be divided or how that's going to get taken into account.
What happens if there isn't agreement on that? Or let's say in the background it's always been one person who's received the benefits while you were married, and then it just carries on the status quo. That can be something that's taken into account in negotiations.
100%. Yeah. It all goes in the pot at the end of the day. There's one part that needs to be kind of divided and shared, and all what's taken into account is, you know, where the children are, everyone's earnings, etc., etc. So it's all looked at. It's all a financial resource at the end of the day.
And I guess where it would pop up in Alison's world is that if she was doing the budgets for both of those people, then the income from the child tax credits would pop up in the ex-wife's budget, but not the husband's. Yeah. Okay, so that answers that one. I don't think there are any more questions at the moment, and we're almost at 6:30. Quickly, if this is your last opportunity, quickly to ask Alison any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I'd like just to say thank you very much to Alison for coming along, and also thank you to everybody who's attended. Our next Bristol Break-up Club is on, I think it's the 22nd of June. Is it 22nd of June? Yeah, 22nd of June, which is actually a Tuesday, which is unusual for us because we're usually on a Wednesday. And we have a money coach coming in to talk to us about managing money and money mindset and things like that post-divorce, which should be really good. So thank you very much. And go on then, Alison.
I think the 22nd of June might be a Wednesday because my birthday's on the Tuesday, and that's
so I'm going to check my calendar and tell you exactly when it is. So it is must be Tuesday the 21st. No, I think it's Tuesday the 21st. It is in my diary, but it's not popping up on my phone at the moment, which is helpful. But we will absolutely advertise it anyway. It's middle of June, and we have a money coach coming in to talk to us. So Wednesday the 22nd of June. Thank you, Sally.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join you. And as I said before, if anyone wants to ask me some questions, that's absolutely fine if you want to follow up afterwards.
Yeah, and I think Stowe will be sending out an email to everybody who's attended tomorrow, so you'll have all of the contact details for all of us if there's any questions that you want to ask. Okay. So thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.